Welcome to Meet the Press College Roundtable edition. Since the onset of COVID-19, uncertainty has been the one consistent part of everyday life. Colleges, businesses, and cultural institutions like sports have all gone through dramatic changes, and the uncertainties in the economy may leave college students, frankly, in the worst position of all. Meanwhile, protests over race and policing have erupted across the country over police abuse, pushing businesses and cities to rethink hiring, bias, and racism. To talk about all of this, our guest today is Marc Cuban, entrepreneur, investor, also owner of the Dallas Mavericks, maybe a once-and-future politician. You may also know him from his role on Shark Tank. Mr. Cuban, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I think this will be a great conversation. Joining us to ask the questions are Parker Jensen. He's a rising senior at my alma mater, the George Washington University. Parker, you cover inequality in housing and sports in Washington, D.C. Tell us a little bit about your reporting.
Of course. So I am the current executive producer of GWTV's student-run sports show. I've also covered D.C. housing in the past with a couple of projects. And through that, I've seen how gentrification and the effects of gentrification has affected the D.C. community, and specifically those in low-income communities. I've also seen how racial injustice affects athletes in particular. So initially, I came into journalism looking to talk about sports, but through these projects and through these endeavors, I've felt that it's been a fulfilling process to learn about both these topics.
Excellent. Love the expand the aperture there. Up next is Ghael Fobes. He's a rising junior at Syracuse University's Newhouse School. Ghael, tell us a little bit about what drew you into journalism.
Thanks, Chuck. I moved to this country from Mexico when I was 6 years old, knowing really only a handful of words in English. I think if not for the dedication of my public school teachers, I really would not have found a calling in helping people tell their stories. At Syracuse, I created the Daily Orange's weekly podcast. That's the independent student newspaper, and emphasis on independent because it is not at all tied to the university other than we cover the university.
And kudos, Ghael, for the Meet the Press mug, making it into your shot there. Always appreciate that. And finally, we have Chan'cellore Makanjuola. She's a Dallas native. She's a student at UC Berkley's Graduate School of Journalism, where she produces documentary films. Chan'cellore, tell us a little bit why you picked up a camera.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been fascinated by filmmaking, and it was in undergrad when I finally got the opportunity to make films of my own, including a short documentary that I worked on. And part of the reason I got into journalism, specifically documentary filmmaking, was to tell the stories of those who are often overlooked or who have overcome diversity. And I just want to use that as a way to educate and inspire others. And I feel I can do that best through film.
Well, we will look forward to your entries into the Meet the Press Film Festival very soon. Chan'cellore, with that, since you're a Dallas native, you're going to go first. You got the first question to Mr. Cuban.
Well, hi, Mr. Cuban.
Hi, Chan'cellore. First of all, call me Mark. Everybody call me Mark. I don't like the Mr. stuff.
Okay, awesome. Hi, Mark. My first question is, training for the NBA season starts, the NBA season restart begins in about 2 weeks, and there's been a disagreement among players on the best way to address the current protest on racial injustice, with some players like LeBron James kind of wanting to use basketball as a way to speak out about the platform or about social injustice, but also Kyrie Irving saying that the upcoming basketball season could distract from the movement. So my question is, as an owner of an NBA team, would you support your players if they choose to sit out this season as a way to support the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yes. There's 450 NBA players, and it's their league. I mean, we are truly a players-driven league. And so, yes, I'm proud of our players for speaking up. I'm proud of them that this topic is this important to them, and they're really using their platform for societal good. So, yes.
And I also wanted to follow up with that, too. Due to concerns over COVID-19, would you support your players if they choose to sit out as a way to avoid being potentially exposed to the virus?
Yeah, the Commissioner, Adam Silver, has already said that all players will have that option. It's completely up to them.
Awesome.
Parker, you've got the next question.
Yeah, so despite the fact that the NBA is predominantly composed of black athletes. There's only 3 not white majority owners. There are 8 black general managers, only 4 of which have the final say in basketball operations, and 7 black head coaches. What do you think the NBA should do to address the lack of diversity in these high-ranking positions?
I mean, I think we've been good in terms of improving over time, but we can always do better. You know, I know there's been discussion of a Rooney Rule where African-American and minority applicants have to be considered for all executive positions. I can tell you since the time I bought the Dallas Mavericks, our CEO of business operations has always been an African-American. We've had 2 individuals in the post. Now Cint Marshall, an African-American woman, is currently our CEO. But again, there's always room for improvement. And I'd love to see a Rooney Rule or something equivalent where it just takes some teams and really puts at the forefront of their mind to consider minority applicants.
And if I could follow up quickly on that, what do you think the NBA should do, and specifically owners should do, in order to address these social concerns and actually implement change? We've seen a lot of players, and you talked about it, coming out and talking about these social issues, but the owners necessarily haven't come out and said much. And I'm curious, have you been talking to other owners about what the next steps are to listen to the players' voices?
No, I have not talked to any owners about this at all, honestly, but I have talked to my players and tried to listen to them more than anything else. And I know in our league meetings, that's been what's been encouraged. Listen to our African-American and minority players because they have standing. It's their experiences that are educating us all. You know, it's a process that's not moving fast enough. And, you know, as you mentioned, the majority of ownership is white. And it's incumbent upon us to have the conversations. You know, the reality right now, Parker, is that it's very difficult for white people to discuss race. It's very difficult for us, you know, to discuss the topic of white privilege. Just, you know, when we hear it, we become very defensive. And so we all have a platform as owners in the NBA, but I think the primary thing that I've tried to do, and I think others, again, not talking to them, but hearing from others, is to listen to our players and really allow them to take the lead because they have, you know, it's their experiences that are educating us all.
Ghael, next question.
Yeah, Marc, you are a working class kid turned billionaire investor and entrepreneur. This pandemic, its economic fallout, and its disproportionate effect on communities of color have left many college students and young people to question the nature of the institutions they've grown up with. Could you confidently tell a college student today that the system that allowed you to prosper is functioning properly?
You know, that's a big question, right? And there's a lot of components to it. You know, do I think the educational system that I grew up through public schools and a public university, Indiana University, is well suited to help everybody? Of course not. It's not. You know, from the youngest age, you know, schools need to get better. We need to improve, particularly schools in disadvantaged communities. Public universities across all states have become too expensive. And now with the pandemic, it's going to be far more difficult for them to operate as business as usual. And it's a great time to disrupt them and really change it so there's priorities given to students and the costs are reduced. It's ridiculous how much it costs. You know, part 2 to that, you know, there is an expansion of economic disparity, of income inequality, and that's something we truly need to address. You know, historically, we've tried to do things top down, where people like me or the Federal Reserve, let's use them as an example, has plugged money into the system. Effectively, you know, quantitative easing has become UBI for rich people, where assets have become inflated. Financial assets have become inflated, and that's helped the rich. But at the same time, people at the bottom don't participate in that. So we really have got to start to focus on a bottom-up approach. And I will add this, and I think it's a potential problem as we look forward. You know, when we look at the stock market right now, we see it's reapproaching its record highs and could exceed those record highs. That's going to mean senior level compensation, executive compensation could set records. And we saw what happened after the 2008, 2009 financial crisis. We saw Occupy Wall Street grow because of the inequities of executive compensation. When we look forward towards the end of this year and we start seeing announcements of record executive compensation, record hedge fund earnings, I think that could be a real problem for societal unrest. I don't think people are going to appreciate that because it just expands income equality. And I think it's a real challenge that is not being addressed right now. And the Federal Reserve has got to look at the societal impacts of what they're doing.
And just to follow up there and kind of dovetailing off of what Parker's question before, I guess I'm curious, you spoke about white people being hesitant to have have conversations surrounding race. I'm curious, at what point in your life did it dawn on you that privilege played a role in your success?
It's been an ongoing process, honestly. I can honestly say 3-4 years ago, I would have looked at this completely different. But, over the last two years is probably when it's really, really resonated with me that, my experience is different, and it's not just George Floyd. It's been happening again over the last couple of years. When I was a kid growing up, I'm old enough, I had the long hippie hair and, I got pulled over by police all the time because I never owned a car that cost more than $200. And they were all junkers. And, pulling over a kid with long hair and it happened all the time. I never had to worry about, the thought of violence never crossed my mind. And so, those types of thoughts, that kind of recognition really is relatively recent for me.
Chan'cellore, you've got the next question. We're starting round 2.
Okay. Well, I just want to say historically, given that you're also an entrepreneur and a businessman, historically businesses owned by people of color have been, especially black-owned businesses, have been denied loans at a much higher rate than those owned by white people. And in May, you offered to help women and minority-owned businesses that weren't able to obtain a loan through the Payment Protection Program. You offered to help connect them to a bank. And so my question is, have you personally invested in small businesses, particularly black-owned businesses that have been impacted by the pandemic? And if not, would you commit to doing so?
Yeah, the answer is yes, I have. I've historically done it. I've done it a lot through Shark Tank companies. I've done it a lot through other companies. I don't know the exact amounts or the exact number in my portfolio, but you can go to marccuban.com and see all the different companies that I've invested in. I don't have a count for minority-owned businesses, but I know for women-owned and run businesses, I think I was about 48%. I partnered last year, probably 18 months ago now, with a woman of color by the name of Arlen Hamilton. And she's got a fund called Backstage Capital that invests exclusively with people of color, particularly women of color, in their businesses. And I just scaled up my investment with her another $5 million a couple weeks ago.
And just to quickly follow up on that, I just wanted to ask, specifically during this pandemic, have you invested in any new companies or new small businesses that are black-owned?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, I've partnered with Arlen and probably 2 or 3 specific businesses that are owned by people of color, not necessarily only black, but definitely people of color.
Parker, you've got the next question.
Mark, back in 2012, you released an article talking about the meltdown of the college education system. And more recently, 2019, you tweeted out that college students shouldn't go for big-name schools if they're not able to afford them. I'm curious, with student debt at an all-time high and with a stagnant economy, what can college students do to ensure financial stability as they enter the workforce?
Well, there's a couple questions there. First, in talking to kids getting ready to go to school, go to a community college first. Introduction to freshman English is not going to be a whole lot different between the local community college and Harvard. Same with psychology. Don't spend the money that you may need to go into a bigger name school. That's going to save you a lot of money. In terms of what you do now, if you're a recent graduate and you're facing debt, just get a job, right? When I graduated from Indiana University way back when, that was the last time the unemployment rate was over 10%. And so it was very difficult for me to get a job. And, the advice I gave myself back then is the same I give to new graduates now. To get a job, be a free agent. When you get that first job, you learn a lot about yourself. You're finally getting paid to learn. You get to learn about, whatever industry you choose your job in. And as you get smarter about all those things going forward, then you can take that experience and platform it and go into something that takes you to the next level. And I've been telling kids, be like an NBA free agent, increase your skill set, and then jump to the team that pays you the most or fulfills your needs the best. And so you just, the days of looking for a career upon graduation are over. You've got to really act as a free agent, do what's best for you, but you've got to get in the game and get that first job to get going.
Ghael, last question goes to you.
I have a simple question for you. What's one big change you think we're going to see in how colleges operate after the pandemic?
Well, that's a great question, Ghael. I think two things there's two great opportunities. One are partnerships. There's no reason a Harvard can't partner with any school, a historically black college, whatever it may be, and share some of their brand equity with them, or share, and exchange professors, exchange systems that allow some of the schools that may not be doing as well financially. And when I say that, I mean in terms of operating or in terms of endowment, and help them grow. And second, schools are going to have to flatten themselves. There are more administrators making over $200,000 a year in universities than there are professors. There are teaching assistants that don't get a living wage, and that money, instead of going to administrators, should go to the people who actually teach the classes so that they can actually live. And when we start doing those things, then we can start looking at reducing the cost of education. I'll give you one other example. I went and gave a speech, it's probably 5 years ago, to a bunch of rich people. And they were all bragging, and we were talking about education and the cost of education, and a bunch of them were bragging about how they donated all this money and had names on buildings. I built this building or that building, and I was proud of it. And I just looked at them and I said, you guys realize you just increased the cost of education for everybody who attends that university, because those buildings eat forever. They have to be managed, maintained, supported, reconfigured all the time. And so college students, people who donate, administrators, university presidents, they're going to have to realize that the economics of colleges just changed dramatically. All their top revenue students are typically immigrants, typically coming from China, typically paying full tuition and room and board, and that's helps subsidize other students. All those things are going to change. So the operations and the economics of universities are going to have to change dramatically. Hopefully that answers your question.
Marc, not only that, you seem to hint very quickly that you think consolidation is coming, that in some ways Harvard might have franchises in 50 states. University of Texas, the bigger brands that have the ability. Is that sort of like what we saw with Mayo Clinic, what you saw with Cleveland Clinic, and what they did in Arizona and Florida? Is that a vision you think could happen in higher ed?
It should be. I mean, look, the number of students Harvard or any leading university accepts is a limit they put on themselves. It's not that they can't train or educate more people. It's not that they can't expand. Look what Purdue Global did. And Purdue's one of our arch rivals, but I'll give them credit. They bought an online school and used the Purdue brand to take it online and expanded what they're doing with online education, and it's worked out very well. So I think, the brand name schools, instead of having these artificial limits on the number of students that they allow into their programs, why couldn't they extend them, particularly for online? Maybe they think they'll dilute their brand, but that really shouldn't be the goal. If you're an institute of higher education, should your goal be maintaining my brand and making sure I don't dilute my brand, or doing the best you possibly can to use great education and educate as many kids as possible?
One thing's for sure, disruption is coming, and it's coming fast. We're going to leave it there. Marc Cuban, you more than delivered. I told these guys you have a lot of thoughts on a lot of things, and they're interesting, they're unique. No, and I just told them avoid healthcare, because then we'll spend a whole half hour. I say that. You have a fascinating healthcare plan. I told them to look it up in another day and another year, and another time. That would be definitely worth some time.
And you only heard the beginning
through.
of it, Chuck.
Thank you, sir.
A whole lot more has been added.
No doubt, I am sure. We all hope there's something to watch on television that is live sports at some point, but I hope it's done. I hope it's done safely and healthy, sir.
Thank you. I hope so too.
All right, guys. Chan'cellore, Ghael, Ghael, why don't you start us off here? What's your big takeaway?
I guess the big takeaway for me is I think it's not just college students or young people right now that are looking at the world in a different way, considering all the different crises affecting it. I think it's pretty clear that Marc is someone who's thought about these issues. I mean, particularly with racial inequities. I think it's more heartening to think that people in his position are considering that societal unrest is a possibility if persistent inequalities continue.
Having somebody that wealthy identify that, I think you're right, it's a very important point. Chan'cellore, what were some of your takeaways?
Like my biggest one was that he supports his players. I mean, like we're in an age now where some people like they aren't afraid to like not speak up, or like a lot of basketball players have kind of taken on this role, and even athletes, of activism and speaking out against racial injustice. And so at least the ones on the Mavericks or others in the NBA, if they feel that they have the support of their team or their owner, that they're comfortable speaking out against this, or maybe even using their own form of protest, whether they decide to sit out or play. It's good to hear that or it's fascinating to hear that at least he supports his players' decisions.
Well, and how about the fact, Chan'cellore, I think he's always a businessman, and he talked about free agency. If you're an NBA player, do you want to work for an owner like that?
Yeah, I would hope so.
Right?
One that allows you to
That's
express
probably good for business for him. Yeah.
True. Absolutely.
Kyrie Irving's out there going, yeah, maybe I want Marc Cuban as the guy that signs my paycheck.
Yeah, or maybe, I mean, he might be a Mav from this, I don't know, for his next season, who knows, but yeah.
With Kyrie, you never know, right, on that front. Parker, what's your takeaway?
Kind of harp off the free agency analogy that he was using, talking about what college students can be doing now going into the workforce. I think he said it best, just take whatever position you can and kind of learn from it. I think that's a valuable skill to learn. Obviously, he's done it himself. That was his career path. So I thought it was interesting to do so. My only concern is that I don't know if everyone's able to do that, especially the situation that we're in now. We haven't seen this type of situation before necessarily. So I don't know how that's going to work for every single person. However, I do think that's pretty solid advice for college students trying to enter this job market.
Well, notice he didn't say what kind of job to get. He said, get a job. And in that sense, get any job. It's sort of like you don't know what foot in the door could actually lead to something. But the one thing you have to do is stay busy. And at least, treading water is better than taking it on, even when you got those debt issues. This was terrific. By the way, one other point that I think I thought was interesting was how honest Marc was about what he might have thought 5 years ago. And I think that he gave voice, I think, to where a lot of what we've seen sort of in white America in this shift, in many ways, he give voice to quite a bit of those folks as well. Anyway, terrific roundtable. I hope you guys got a lot out of it. I appreciate you doing this, and we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you once again to our excellent college journalists. Be following them for years to come, that's for sure. And we'll be back next week with another edition of Meet the Press College Roundtable Edition. Thanks for watching. Hello from Washington, I'm Chuck Todd, and thanks for checking out the Meet the Press channel on YouTube. Click on the button down here to subscribe, and click over here to watch the latest interviews, highlights, and other digital exclusives.